All right, so now we get to the fun part, the reproductive unit. And you'll be surprised. There's more here to learn than you think. You don't know as much as you think. But I do try to give you a little fair warning for each of these lectures. There are some very graphic images here, and if you haven't already found out, some really graphic images in APR. So if you are watching this and you have your kids at home, I just want to give you a moment to say, hey, you might want to lock the door, close the door, just to get you prepared so you don't have kids inadvertently come in that don't necessarily need to see these yet. All right, the female reproductive system has reproductive organs both internal and external genitalia. And so we're going to look at some of the basic things here. Some you will know, and some you won't know. All right, so these are the ovaries, and so this is one of these that you probably already know. And so this is the site of egg production, or ova or ovum, depending if singular or plural. These are the female version of gonads. These are female gonads. Gonads just mean sex organs, or they refer to testicles and ovaries technically. And these are uniquely designed to produce viable gametes for fertilization, secrete hormones, protect each individual ova until they are released. All right, and so there's two different models here showing you ova or ovaries. These are bilateral, they're paired, so you have a left and a right ovary. They lie on either side of the uterus against the pelvic wall in a region called the ovarian fossa. So this is why sometimes us females, when we have our menstrual cycle, because it lies near retroperitoneally, we can have back pain during menstruation, or if we have ovarian problems like cysts, that type of thing. And so these are held in place by ligaments. We're going to look at the names of these ligaments and that attach them actually into the uterus. So you may have thought, well, they're just kind of hanging out there, but no, they have things that are attaching them and holding them in place. All right, so you may have heard of fallopian tube before, or you know that you have tubes, right? And so these can be called oviduct, fallopian tube, or uterine tube. Either of those three are acceptable. And these are tubes that stretch from the uterus to the ovaries. And of course, the function here is to transport that egg from the ovaries to the uterus, which is what we commonly call the womb. And so here's a look at those fallopian tubes, uterine tubes on these models. These are bilateral, so they are paired. You have a right and a left if you have normal anatomy. And the fertilized egg is going to pass on through those fallopian tubes from the ovaries to the uterus. So here is one of those that you probably don't know. And this is an infundibulum. Infundibulum, and it's funnel shaped. And it reminds me of, if you've ever played those games where you have those little catchers that have the long cones on the outside that you throw balls with and you use it to throw and catch. And I don't know how many people do that anymore, but when we were little, we did that. That's what these remind me of. And these actually catch the eggs. So they catch and channel the released eggs. All right, so here we have the uterus, and this is a hollow muscular organ in the female pelvis it's located between the bladder and the rectum. Once the egg leaves the ovary, it can then be fertilized, and then it will implant itself in the lining of the uterus. And as always, the fundus is typically the top or the part of the structure that goes above the opening, all right? And so we discussed this, but when you are pregnant and you go in for your prenatal care, this is one of the ways they estimate the size of the baby. They estimate the height of the fundus. So when they take that measuring tape and they measure from your pubis modus, I believe, from the pubic bone, they go all the way up to the fundus and measure, and that gives them a good way to estimate the size of the baby. All right, so this is the main portion of the uterus. So what is the main portion of any organ called? Well, if you said body, you're right. This is the uterine body. A little harder to kind of distinguish or identify here. I mean, it's not hard, but you're going to have the uterine body. It's going to be the main portion that basically goes up above the cervix. All right, so here we're going to look at the three types of tissues. We have the endometrium, endo meaning inside or innermost layer. Sometimes it's also called the uterine mucous membrane. So it is the innermost layer, and this is what sheds during menstruation. If you have endometriosis, what happens is some of this particular tissue somehow accidentally, we don't really quite always know, gets out and gets on things all over here. It can actually be on components of your digestive system, attached to your intestines, on your ovaries, lots of different places. And so that will respond just like the uterine lining during menstruation, except it's in the wrong place. So it can become very painful or cause excessive bleeding. And then a little more rarely, you can have what's called adenomyosis, and that's where typically after childbirth, this uterus, as it shrinks back down into a smaller size, original size, it accidentally folds like a fan, and when it does, it traps some of that endometrial tissue inside of the uterine lining, and so then the entire uterine muscle swells, and that can make your uterus extremely large, be very painful, and cause really excessively heavy periods as well. All right, so next we have the muscle layer. What is the prefix for muscle? Myo, right? And so this is the myometrium. So this is the smooth muscle layer. This is going to be the middle, and it's going to be the broadest layer here, and this is where uterine contractions occur. All right, next here we have the cervix. You may be familiar with the cervix. This is what has to dilate to 10 centimeters to allow a baby to come out during childbirth. Sometimes it's called the cervix uteri. This is the lower portion of the uterus. It's approximately 2 to 3 centimeters long, and it contains many mucus-producing cells, and it's protective in function. Here is another model. Here, the cervical canal is the pathway through which the sperm can enter. So they have to enter through the cervix to reach the uterus after sexual intercourse. This allows the flow of menstrual blood also to exit the uterus and go on into the vagina in order to exit the body. And this is definitely critical to the maintenance of pregnancy. So you actually have a mucus plug form here at the cervix. And that cervix and mucus plug helps form a barrier to protect the fetus or the child from microorganisms and other things entering. So this is going to be at the lower end of the uterus. Another one you're probably familiar with here, at least the term, this is your vagina. This is the elastic muscular canal. It connects the uterus to, well, I say yours, you might be a guy, so I apologize if you're a guy. It connects the uterus to the outside world. The vagina receives the penis, of course, during sexual intercourse, but it also serves as a conduit for the menstrual flow from the uterus, and of course during childbirth for the baby to pass through the vagina, which is then we also can call all of this together the birth canal. All right, and so we have to have a name for the everything. So for the opening, the narrowest portion of the vaginal canal, which opens to the surface, is called the vaginal orifice. All right, so next we have the clitoris, and this is located at the anterior end of the vulva. It is a small, sensitive, erectile portion of the female genitalia. It is actually erectile tissue. All right, so next we have the labia. We have labia major and labia minor, and these are two large folds of skin that extend from the mons pubis downwards and backwards, and they eventually merge with the tissue of the perineum. And so this forms the lateral boundaries, basically, of the vulva. So if major is larger, then minor is going to be the smaller set of folds. So this is two small folds of skin. These don't have fat. It's mostly skin, a little elastic tissue there on each side of the opening into the vagina. So now for the ligaments, and we're going to look at, I think, about 3 different types of ligaments here. And what you need to pay attention to is where they attach. Because if you're looking at this picture over here on the right, it would be easy to confuse which one is which, because they look like they're the same thing, but you got to pay attention to where they attach. So this is the suspensory ligament. It actually suspends the ovary. It's the portion of it's part of the broad ligament that extends outward from the ovary to the abdominal wall, and it contains ovarian vessels and nerves. All right, so here we have the ovarian ligament, and this is attached to the ovary inferiorly, and it connects the ovary directly to the uterus. All right, so you need to remember ovarian is ovary to uterus. All right, so you can't see this ligament in the other models, and as you can see here on this model, the pictures of ligaments are on this flat model are very limited. All right, and so this is the round ligament. It originates at what we call the uterine horns, and those are the point where the fallopian tubes enter the uterus, and then is going to attach to the labia major.